Hey guys, this is Illusion Podfics. We're reading Spider-Man Reborn by Reborn. This is Chapter 7. He wouldn't give up. Peter couldn't just let the curse take his family, and he couldn't sit back and watch his dad leave every night. He came home with more bruises and more injuries, and Peter was so scared that he was next. A plan began forming nearly a week after his escape attempt had failed. The plan came in the form of a bookshelf in his dad's office that he once tried to investigate. Either it led to a secret room, or a secret passage outside. Peter could find some answer on what to do here. Once left in his room to sleep for the night, Peter pushed blankets and clothes under his bed to trick anyone who came in to check on him. Inching his door open as quietly as he could, Peter peeked out into the hallway. When he didn't hear a sound, he bolted. Down the hall and straight for the stairs. He pushed his back against the wall, turning to look down the grand staircase. Memories of sneaking around in his stealth missions as Spider-Man formed a vague plan in mind to reach the study without interruption. The first floor cleared, Peter crept down the stairs as quietly as possible. His footy pajamas helped to muffle his footsteps along the way. He could hear quiet conversation from the kitchen. His dad and Alfred's voices were quiet in the evening. Peter picked up his pace once he was off the stairs, rushing for his dad's study while they were occupied. He couldn't have them hear him yet. He couldn't be caught yet. The doorknob was just out of reach. Peter pushed a hand against the door while the other tried to reach up and grab a hold of it. He just has to make it inside. Hopping just beside the doorknob, Peter finally managed to grab a hold of it. His own weight with gravity on his side helped to twist the knob as the door slowly clicked open. Peter was quick to slip inside, closing the door before anyone noticed. He still wasn't sure how the bookshelf opened, but it couldn't be too hard. Movies show secret bookshelves open via a loose book or a bust. He couldn't remember if he's faced a secret bookshelf before. The thought of doing so now made him feel giddy with excitement. This was a serious mission, though. Peter took a minute to force the smile off his face before he began climbing the shelf. Best to start from the top, since his dad is so tall. He wouldn't put the lever in the lower shelves, so low from his reach. He couldn't leave traces of himself or his plan for his dad to catch on to, so Peter had to be careful. Climbing the shelf, Peter avoided stepping anywhere close to whatever trinket his dad had placed in front of the bookshelves while reaching out to tug at everything. Something has to click. 3 shelves later, Peter heard it. A near-silent click of mechanisms whirring behind the shelf. Perfect. Scrambling back to the ground as the shelf pushed, him included, to the side, Peter peered into a hallway. Secret tunnel! Whispering to himself, Peter quickly entered the passageway just as the bookshelf slid back into place. The secret passageway was dimly lit and ill-decorated. There was nothing on the walls or ground around him. The further Peter walked, the worse the dread grew. Peter couldn't possibly find Jason, right? He didn't have his powers, and he was too small to even fight if he had to. Peter had to be smart about this. He had to think things through, because he couldn't afford to run headfirst like he was wanting to do. The passage had begun to slope downwards after a moment, Peter realizing just a little too late. Would this take him to his dad's Batcave? Peter couldn't imagine what it looked like, but he always assumed that it would be similar to a man cave, just with more vigilante gear. The thought made him giggle as he imagined mounted deer heads hanging over the batsuit. A comfy old couch next to a fireplace full of batarangs and other tools or weapons. Light flooded in from ahead. Peter sped up at the exit, rushing to see just where he ended up. The Batcave. It wasn't just a room full of memorabilia and gear. It was a whole-ass cave. Peter gaped at the cavernous room. The passageway opened up to an even larger space with a giant penny and a dinosaur. A whole dinosaur! That's it, Peter decided. He's moving down here. Running straight for the dinosaur, Peter gaped at its sheer size. It must have been modeled to scale. Peter reached out a hand, stroking the toe of the T-Rex glowering above him. It felt so real. He wanted to climb it. Peter studied the scales. The mouth itself would be a great perch once he could reach it. Without any visible handholds and lacking the stickiness his past self had, Peter couldn't climb it. Not yet, anyway. Focus. You have a mission, Peter. He wasn't sure at the time, but his dad would come down soon for patrol. Peter had to hide somewhere that wouldn't be noticed by his dad. Or, Peter grinned. The car. Bat car? Bat vehicle. Bat automobile. Oh, Batmobile. Peter raced for the sleek car parked along the cave wall. His dad must be using this to get around. Wayne Manor was too far out from the city for Batman to swing to and from every night. Spider-Man wouldn't do that trip without a vehicle to make it easier. Trees were too short if you haven't garnered enough momentum to carry you for longer. Peter circled the car, eyeing the seemingly invisible door handles. The car must be equipped with some solenoid with the focus on door handles as well as everything else. He itched to pop the hood, but knowing the time, he couldn't risk it just yet. These kinds of cars usually opened from a button or remote. Running his fingers along the door and where he estimated the handles would be, Peter searched for the easier solution. If there was a button, he could hide inside before his dad came down. Nothing. Remote then. Peter scanned the room, hoping to find something that resembled what he needed. Mr. Stark had kept an organized, chaotic mess in his lab. His dad, it seemed, was organized to the extreme. Everything had a place, and every place either had a plaque or a sign for what belongs there. If the Batmobile uses a remote to open the doors, it would be best to have it equipped to something Batman kept on him without getting in the way. Peter couldn't remember if that suit had buttons when he saw it before, but he was sure it had to be there. Peter spotted the glass casing surrounding the Batsuit across the cave. It should be there. How does it open? Groaning, Peter began to search for another button. His dad was really making this more complicated than it had to be. Peter never needed to lock his suit up since it would take too long to change if he had to waste time looking for a button. Wasted time would be something Batman understands. The protruding bat symbol just below the glass casing caught his eye. Peter crouched down, running fingers along the shape before pressing into it. The symbol sank into the case as the glass slid upwards. Climbing into the casing, Peter tugged the arm towards him immediately. There was no time to marvel at the suit without his dad hanging out inside it. A panel built into the forearm clicked open to reveal various buttons, all colored black without any symbols on them. He couldn't differentiate which buttons may open the car doors. No evidence of worn buttons or secret indicators on any of them. How weren't they worn down already? He needed to get inside. Peter pressed one at random. A sharp sound cut through the air as blades shot out of the gauntlets. Flinching, Peter stared at the blades above him with wide eyes. So cool, he breathed for a moment, calming his racing heart. Without his spidey sense, everything felt so fast, so unexpected. Peter poked at the blade, hissing when he felt it cut. Pressing the same button to retract the knives, Peter picked another one to try. He didn't have time, but also he didn't have any other option. The second button dropped a metal line, reminding Peter a little too much of a fishing line or a garrote. Ignoring that little weapon, Peter pressed another button. The sound of depressurized air leaving its vacuum caught his attention. The car doors climbed upwards, revealing the inside of the Batmobile. The inside looked even better than the outside. The dark leather seats were pristine and well-maintained. The dashboard was filled with buttons and switches. A dark screen sat in the middle of it all. His curiosity only grew as he took in everything. This was nothing like any of Mr. Stark's cars. Excitedly, Peter climbed inside as the door slid shut behind him. On my way. Peter awoke to screeching tires as his body flung against the back seat. His dad's voice was gravel deep, deeper than it had been 3 nights ago. Oh. He fell asleep. Well, maybe he should have taken another nap before going out so late. Peter was supposed to keep his dad safe tonight. He can't waste time sleeping. The car shifted, shaking with the speed of Batman leaping from his seat. Peter stuck his head out, watching his dad disappear into the air. He's in Gotham now. Not above within the safe walls of Wayne Manor anymore. Gotham. Peter climbed up to the front of the car, standing just behind the wheel. The windshield was dark, and the film cast the streets in a darker light. He has a chance now. He can protect his dad. He just has to be smart about it. The door opened, smoothly gliding overhead as Peter tumbled out. He heard the door shut behind him as the air was sealed in. The blueprints for this have to be insane. Nothing like the Iron Man suit, but still something cool. Maybe his dad can show him. Gunshots echoed from down the street, drawing Peter's attention away from the Batmobile. He took off, darting down the near-empty sidewalk in the direction of gunfire. His dad flew that way earlier. What if he got shot? What if he wasn't there and someone else got hurt? What if... Peter's legs pounded against the pavement. The only coverage were the felt pajamas that covered his little feet. Despite that, Peter ran. Despite his age, he sprinted. Despite everything that accumulated to this moment, Peter couldn't wait anymore. He had to be there. He had to help. A firefight with Batman was in progress down the street. Thugs attempted to pave an escape path away from the vigilante. The few civilians outside have already ducked out of the way, hiding in doorways or long gone the other direction. Peter himself ran forward. He didn't have a suit or powers, but he could not leave his dad to fight them alone. Guns always made things more difficult. The range and the power behind them can cause more than one problem when the fight occurs in such a public place. Gunshots echoed more in Peter's mind from before than it did here. The urge to help people grew as he ducked behind a parked car. Peering around it, Peter watched his dad. Batman picked them off, one by one. His technique was brutal, pulverizing the criminals worse than Daredevil leaves his. Even without his enhanced hearing, Peter was sure they were all terrified. Most of them were already on the ground, limp and silent. Too soon the fight was over. It was over before it started, yet Batman wasn't done. Blood pooled on the cement, glinting under pale streetlights. Blood soaked his gloves as his fist flew into the criminals' faces. "Stop!" Peter shouted, fear tinging his voice. He could feel the tears wetting his cheeks already, the brisk wind making him feel far colder. Batman was supposed to be a hero, one just like Spider-Man, a vigilante with the code against killing. What was this, then? Hey, it's okay," a young voice soothed, a small gloved hand landing on his shoulder. Peter whirled around, stumbling back against the car. Robin crouched before him, a strange smile on his face. "Robin! Jason is Robin. Is... Jace..." "Peter," Batman's voice called softly. His towering frame withdrawn as he approached. Peter sucked in a breath as he was picked up, clinging to his father tightly while the air stirred. They swung up, away from the men and the blood, away from the fight that wasn't a fight. Only once they reached the rooftop did his dad continue. "How did you get here?" "Are they dead?" Peter sniffled, wiping his nose. He couldn't stop seeing it. Batman beating men down already. His dad punching and punching men who have long since gone limp. That wasn't Batman. He had limits. Rules. That... No. His dad went quiet after that, staring down at Peter. He didn't like it. Batman wasn't his dad. Not like this. He's heard of stories of Batman. Jason and Dick talked about him tripping over his cape, or stumbling over words, stories of Batman catching them as they fell, and picking up victims with comforting words. A hero that Peter could be too. Could be again. How long until he becomes Batman? Until Spider-Man doesn't pull back as much as he did? "That must have been scary," Robin spoke softly, coming up to Batman's right side. His costume was wrong. It didn't look like Jason's. Peter studied the faker. He wasn't Jason. "I told you to go home, Timothy," his dad growled, hands holding Peter tighter. "Yeah, well, you can't really make me. Look what you've become. Your kid is scared of you now. This isn't what Batman is supposed to be. They weren't mobsters, Bruce." The fake Robin snapped, arms crossing over his chest. Peter shivered, grabbing the end of the cape his dad pulled to wrap around him. His dad stayed silent, staring at the both of them. He wanted to argue, say he wasn't scared. Would it be a lie? Is he scared? His dad would never hurt him. Peter knows this. He knows, but his dad was willing to nearly kill them. Peter from before knew all too well the slippery slope that murder is. That killing only breeds more killing. His Aunt May knew it. Uncle Ben believed it. Did his parents from before know it? Was his dad from then just as willing to dance too close to that line? Home? Peter asked, poking his dad's cheek. He didn't want to be out here anymore. What could he do for his dad in Gotham? What was he thinking? Peter had nothing to offer the vigilante. Not yet, at least. He didn't want to see his dad like that. Peter didn't want to think his dad would go so far. There was someone new at breakfast. After Peter's great escape, he's been under constant supervision. He couldn't wander too far before someone came to watch him. His dad hadn't brought up the criminals other than to tell Peter they were alive and recovering. Peter pretended like it didn't bother him. 2 entire weeks passed since then, and Peter had finally come around. Peter wondered, at first, if he was so aggressive because of Jason. Because Jason is missing, and he's letting his self-hatred out on the criminals of Gotham. Spider-Man rarely did that, but vigilantes are still human. Humans have a limit, so, rationally, he understands. He's accepted his dad is working through his emotions, and he'll soon be back to normal. And now, there was someone new at the table. Who are you? Peter stood behind the boy, glaring at him. This wasn't Jason. Jason sat there. He always sat there. I'm Tim. You must be Peter, Tim said, smiling at Peter. No, Peter pushed at Tim's arms. He can't sit in Jason's chair. Jason sat there. Was his dad replacing Jason? First the fake Robin, now the fake brother. He couldn't replace him. Jason was coming back. Peter, be nice. His dad entered the room, taking his seat at the head of the table. His mom watched them from her own seat, the empty space between her and Bruce left for Peter to take. Jay sits here, Peter argued, pushing the boy fruitlessly again. The new kid's smile dropped, moving to stand before his dad raised a hand to stop him. You can sit there, Tim. Peter, take your seat. His dad spoke, his voice level, but Peter could hear the warning. He huffed, stomping around the table to climb into his chair. His dad didn't get it. Peter has to believe that Jason would be back, because the alternative was too much. His brother wasn't gone, and his dad can't just give up. He was almost 3, but they still treated him as if he was a baby. He knows they don't believe him when he claims Jason was coming back. He knows why. It doesn't mean he likes it. Peter has to stay optimistic. He has to hope. But Tim? Who is he? Tim is staying with us for a few days, chum. He's a guest. Why? His parents are away. Like Jason? His dad frowned, petting Peter's hair gently. No, they're coming back soon. Peter huffed, focusing on the pancakes Alfred brought in. Jason was coming back too. He watched Tim during breakfast, eating his own pancakes quietly. He sat too straight, ate too cleanly. Peter had to sit and rub his face with a wet towel when he was done, while Tim got up to help Alfred clear the table. Timothy. Angrily, Peter hopped from his chair, grabbing his plate to help clean too. He was the fake Robin too. He was replacing Jason. Friendly competition never hurt anyone, Bruce. His mom teased softly. His dad hummed while Peter rushed to pass Tim, who carried his plate before Peter. Tim smiled, like they weren't fighting. Peter stuck out his tongue at him before running away. Not if Peter can help it. No, Tim couldn't be Robin. It wasn't safe for him, and Jason needs his suit when he comes back. Peter decided he didn't like Tim since that morning. Tim took over the house in a way only Peter really noticed. How he sat in the library where Jason always sat, on Jason's couch, or at Jason's table. He sat where Jason always did, and Peter didn't like it. He had to read his books by the window to avoid the older boy. The window gave enough light, but it wasn't the same as sitting on the couch. He glared at Tim again as the replacement read some book that wasn't a classic. "I'm not trying to replace your brother." Tim looked at him, frowning after an hour passed. "Yes, you are." "Bruce said it was okay for me to stay a bit. I didn't want to." "Liar!" Peter threw his book away, angry at Tim and angry at Jason. He didn't want Tim to replace Jason. He didn't want Jason to be dead. He could only hope for so long before it dies too, and he hates it. He hates not being able to do anything about it. There was so much Spider-Man could have done, could have helped with, but he couldn't. He didn't have his powers. He didn't have the same training. He had nothing, and he was trapped here, trapped to watch his family leave, and trapped to sit at their funerals. "I'm sorry. I really don't want to replace him." Tim put his own book down gently. Peter stood by the window, refusing to step closer to him. "Bruce needed help. I only wanted to help him. I'm helping him." Tim sighed, standing from the couch. Peter watched him come towards him. He moved too, keeping the couch between them. "You are, but you couldn't help him with this. You saw him that night. You saw how far he's fallen. This isn't who Batman is." That night, Peter remembers it all too well. He remembers the sound of fists hitting face, of blood painting the asphalt. He hasn't forgotten just how little he could do, too. How he could only beg from behind a car while his dad nearly killed them. "Then teach me, or I'll hate you forever." Peter nodded at his ultimatum. Tim had to have been trained. He could pass his knowledge on to Peter so he could help too. He didn't have to be Robin. He couldn't be Spider-Man just yet, but he could still help. Since Dick and his dad refused to, Tim could take that job. Peter should be old enough soon to go and help them, and then Tim could go back home. He could find Jason once he trains enough. He can protect his family after he's relearned it all. He just needs someone to show him how it's done. His memories from before didn't transfer to muscle memory. He needed to learn it all over again. "I don't think Bruce will like that," Tim frowned, staring at Peter from across the couch. "Then I hate you." Peter stomped on the carpet. "Go away." Peter glared as Tim laughed. Alone in the library, Peter sank to the floor, taking the book he threw in his hands. Pride and Prejudice. The book was so worn already. Jason's handwriting added to the pages inside. Nothing Peter could make out, but he liked to look at it. He never had much of a connection to Richard and Mary. His memories faded quickly when he moved in with his aunt and uncle. Peter's memories now haven't faded. He could still remember Jason's smile and his laugh. He could see his brother write in the margins and sit in his chair. He wouldn't lose this connection. He has to save it for when Jason comes home. He needs to remember so he can bring him home. "I don't like him," Peter whines, hanging half off the bed. Dick's room was covered in circus posters and had a little stuffed elephant named Zitka on his desk. Peter liked to put Quack together with him when he visited Dick's room. "Tim isn't so bad, Pete," Dick hummed from his desk, flipping through a file. "You just gotta give him a chance." "I want Jason." Peter slid further off the bed, his hands catching him as he rolled away from it. Dick moved away from the desk, lifting Peter in his arms gently. "I do too, Poussard. I miss him so much. But you can't hate Tim for it. He hasn't done anything wrong." Peter groaned, falling backwards in Dick's grasp. Dick held him tightly as he hung himself halfway upside down. "Teach me to fight?" "No dice, baby bird." Dick carried Peter out of his room, leaving their stuffed animals to play together. Peter watched the hallway from the different angle as Alfred carried a laundry basket, passing them. It wasn't new for Dick to carry Peter upside down, so the older man hardly spared a glance at it. Peter watched as they took the stairs before he was dropped to the grass outside. "Why don't we work on your handstand?" Dick crouched beside him as Peter reluctantly stood back up. Raising his arms, Peter leaned forward before pushing through the momentum. He felt the warmth of Dick's hands as they hovered close. Peter ignored it as he kicked up, following the instructions Dick gave as he kicked his legs for balance. He just has to prove himself. Peter had to remind himself of this, repeating the mantra like a prayer most days. If he can't bring Jason home, then he has to protect his family from following his fate. He has to become Spider-Man so he can keep them safe. Peter dropped after a few seconds as his arms buckled under his weight. Oof. You managed longer than last time. Great job, Pete. Dick raised his hands for the expected high five. Peter pushed off the ground to slap his hand back. Ready to try again? Yeah. Tim continued to come over more and more. Peter had tried to discourage his visits, but every time was foiled before he could even start. Tim couldn't join their family. He could go missing too, and Peter isn't ready to save him. Alfred would send him back to the garden when he carried spiders into the kitchen. Dick carried Peter away when Tim was trying to do homework or sleep. His dad took him to his room when he tried to pick fights with Tim. His mom would take him out for shopping anytime he started searching for Tim. All in all, his plans wasn't working. No one listened to him when he complained that Tim was stealing Jason's place, and no one listened when he said Tim didn't belong there. Peter knew, rationally, that he was being cruel to the boy, but he didn't want Tim to get hurt either. Tim was the new Robin, trailing after Batman, and he could get hurt, or go missing too. He couldn't let Tim get close, not when Peter was the curse sending them to their early graves. Jason was out there somewhere, and Peter couldn't go and find him. He wasn't old enough to leave the manor alone, and no one wanted to help him look. Peter refused to believe he was gone. He couldn't have been the cause of another death so soon. As much as all the facts pointed to his brother being dead, Peter relied heavily on the childish refusal to believe it. He fell for this false sense of hope that maybe Jason was out there, that Jason was looking for them and waiting to be saved. It was better to hope than to accept reality. He couldn't let his family fall away so soon. He just wasn't ready. So Peter continued to try and push Tim away. You're gonna die, Peter growled, peering around a bookshelf in the library. Tim was in Jason's chair at the window now, working on homework. Peter had just managed to duck away from his parents, and he knew exactly where Tim would be at this time. Hello to you too, Peter. Go home. Tim had started ignoring Peter after a while, so Peter wasn't surprised when he hadn't responded to that. Huffing, Peter grabbed his Chemistry for Kids book. The spelling was dumb, but it was one of the books Jason got from him before he left. He climbed into the chair across from Peter, purposely pushing his papers and books in Tim's way to clear space. Peter eyed Tim for a moment, but he only sighed before moving his books out of the way. Why was Tim so patient? It was infuriating. Peter wanted a reaction. He wanted Tim to fight back. At the very least, Peter could know that Tim could take care of himself, but he doesn't. Why do you come here? My parents are out of the country, so Bruce wants me to stay here with him until they come back, Tim explained as he flipped through one of his textbooks. Oh, so Tim was alone too. Sorry. Peter stared at his brightly colored book, feeling Tim's eyes on him for the first time in this interaction. Was Tim trying to clean Gotham for them? Make sure his parents would be able to get home safely after their trip? Peter wants to do that too, someday. Tim could protect Gotham while Peter was training. He just has to convince someone to teach him, or he'll have to practice himself. Thanks, Peter. Can you teach me? No. Tim smiled this time, and Peter couldn't help his own grin in response. He'll convince Tim eventually. If the boy won't leave, then Peter will make use of it. Once he's better than Tim, he can go out in the night in his place. Then Tim will be saved from the curse. Tim looked at his book while Peter flipped through it. He knows all of this already, but he's come to the realization he does have to relearn it all. It was like he could forget pieces that he knew so well before, and the abrupt reminder seared the memory back in place. If he could just convince Dick to sit still long enough, maybe he could hear more about science. At least until he could actually read those words again. Do you like science? Tim leaned forward to catch a better glimpse of the smiling particles and ions on the page. I read this 100 times, Peter pushed the book to Tim, trusting the boy to give it back. Tim flipped the pages curiously as Peter watched him. He hummed at a few pages before nodding. Can you read this? Peter stared at the large textbook dropped in front of him. He had to flip onto his knees for a better view of the whole book before he flipped the cover open. A little. Read it to me? Stop asking me to train you to fight and I will. Tim grinned. Peter agreed, only because if he can get smarter sooner, he can be a vigilante even faster. Physics were important for Spider-Man in order to do what he did before. He'll have to learn as much as he can before he can make a new suit and protect his family. Bruce peeked into the library quietly. Alfred had seen Peter go inside there after Tim went to do his homework away from distractions. Said distraction ultimately being Peter. It was no secret that Peter didn't like Tim, and everyone has spent the past month just trying to intervene before Peter could really do any damage. His son was tenacious. He knew what he wanted and was not to be dissuaded, even if his goal was to chase out their house guest. Peter was curled on the couch, his arm tucked around his stomach as he leaned into Tim. Tim's biology textbook sat on his lap as he read a passage to Peter. The scene reminded Bruce painfully of all the days Peter spent on that couch with Jason. When Peter was too young and would be laid out on the couch while Jason would read his favorites for him. When Peter learned to crawl and would get trapped on the couches, Jason forced him to listen to Othello. Maybe Peter was finally accepting Tim. Bruce never wanted to replace Jason. No one could. He didn't even want Tim to be Robin, but Batman was lost without his bird at his side. He would have crossed a line that he never wanted to even consider without Hope flying at his side. The Joker deserved death for what he did, but Bruce couldn't be the one to do it. Clark had already hammered it into his mind before. Batman couldn't make an exception. It would be too easy to cross that line again afterwards. He didn't want to be a killer, and he didn't want Peter's dad to become one. Peter had already witnessed something he shouldn't. His son saw Batman at his worst, and it was only the fact that Peter knew him that had brought his son around at all. Bruce couldn't put that fear in his son again. He had to be better. Peter didn't deserve to lose a brother. He didn't deserve to have a killer for a father. Bruce would keep it in check. He'd keep his Robin safe, and he'll protect his son from ever facing what they face. Peter won't have to see the darkness Gotham possesses. He hated that Peter already had to face death. Losing his big brother so suddenly, Peter was too young to understand death, leading him to hope that Jason would be back. No one could tell him otherwise, and it hurt Bruce more to see his hope crumble. He hated that he couldn't do anything more for Peter, but maybe it will be better now. Not okay, but better. Peter isn't alone, and he never will be. Spying on the kitties, Bats? Selina strutted to his side, gliding a hand across his shoulders. He hummed before stepping away from the door. Peter is with Tim. I don't hear any yelling, do you? Peter is a gentle soul. He might try to chase Tim out, but he would never aim to hurt him. Tim won't replace Jason. He never could. But that shouldn't stop Peter from having another brother, from finding some happiness where he could. At least Peter has a family. He has Dick and now Tim. Alfred, Selina, and Bruce himself were there for Peter, always. He would never have to be alone, and Bruce has enough plans prepared for all the circumstances going forward. Even if those potentialities hurt, his son wouldn't be as alone as Bruce was. Peter would be safe. He would be protected. Peter Wayne has the vigilantes of Gotham and the Justice League to watch his back. Alright guys, and that is the end of Chapter 7 of Spider-Man Reborn by Reborn. Sorry if you guys can hear a bunch of noise in the background and everything. That humming is the AC, so sorry about that, but I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next chapter.